Here we go. This is a video I've been waiting for a long time. We're going to get into a topic that I think people have been asking for since I made my big mega module video for Foundry VTT to get into some of the more advanced and more complicated modules and how I use them to run my game. So this is what we're going to cover. We're going to cover some real simple JavaScript and working with macros and working with your Chrome browser to understand how to build and debug macros bit by bit rather than trying to get them all going in one go. We're going to go through Combat Utility Belt, which is probably the first big macro that if you're running D&D or something else that it's compatible with, I think it can do Pathfinder. But if you're running one of those, you should probably look at Combat Utility Belt because there's some stuff in there that automates Foundry and makes it pretty useful if you're going to be running one of those role-playing games. And then getting into token magic, which I think is applicable to anybody who's using tokens and has magical effects or spell effects or things like that that you want to apply to help the players have a little bit more interactive of a world that they're dealing with. Something that, in my opinion, is pretty fancy and pretty easy to use. It's been made pretty usable for folks once you understand how macros work, and then they become approachable. So that's why I'm doing the video in this order. And then I'm going to get into some tips for how I use those for my isometric playstyle, specifically how to use token magic to make it easy for you to see behind big tokens that might be obscuring parts of the map. Let's get into it. First up, let's get into Foundry itself and let's talk about chats versus scripts when you're using the macro bar. So this is your macro bar down here. You can click in this one area, up comes new macro, and there's a drop down that you can set to script or chat right here in the middle. So if I do chat and I call this hello, and I have a new chat here that I call hello, and I'm gonna bump up my resolution here like crazy so that you can see it a little bit easier. All right, so I hit save macro and then I click on hello and run it, and up in the chat comes running as me hello. All right, let's edit this guy. So if I edit the macro and say, don't do hello, do, I don't know, emote, right? Hello, then save macro. And if I go and click a captain and run that, it's gonna emote as Captain Graysail saying hello here, right? So it's gonna run as her and actually do the emote command, which is really more used for like an expression like shrugs, right? So this is kind of IRC style, getting a persona, an avatar to be narrated in the third person here. All right, so that's how to do a chat, but how is it different if we're doing a script? So I can do edit here, and I can run it as a script instead. And you're gonna notice if I just do hello, this is no longer gonna work. And so I don't have to actually go to the exit it. I can just execute macro down here. So if I execute the macro, it's going to come up with an error and say, that's not JavaScript. You need to actually give me JavaScript for this to work. So let's get into a little bit about how that works. Just remember, in learning how to script, it's a trap, right? Yeah, Foundry is definitely sort of a tool that's got some advanced, what we call sharp edges on them. Once you start getting into this world, you will learn how deep the rabbit hole goes. This is actual coding. There's a little bit of scripting. There's a lot of examples. I'm going to try and bring you along to learn some of the things that you might find useful when you're first getting started, but this is definitely a learn things in small bits at a time. You're not going to become an expert JavaScripter overnight. So the first tutorial I want to go through is messing with chat and learning how to see stuff in the debug. So we're going to learn how to open the Chrome console, how to do a console.log statement, and how to do chat and a little bit of variables using that let command. Let's go look at it. So I'm just going to pull up my code reference here a little bit separately. So I can instead have a chat message dot create, open parentheses, open curly brackets. The next thing I'm giving it here is something called JSON. So this is JavaScript object notation. I can give it this little message, content, hello world. It's a coder joke. Close curly brackets, close parentheses, semicolon. If I execute this macro, it's going to go and do the same thing that would have happened if I had it as a chat. by just pushing this to the output. So another thing I want to show you is how to pop open sort of the JavaScript part of your browser here, so you have more ability to debug as you're coding scripts. So if you go in the top right of your Chrome browser, there's a little 3 dots, and you can open up more tools, and you open up dev tools. That's also, you know, what is that? That's like Option Command I or something, or Alt Command I. So up in your browser, here comes this console. And when you're doing this, you can see sort of the network load and like what's going on when it pulls resources. So if I switch to a different thing here, you're going to see it just pulled it down a whole bunch of network information. But I've switched to the console, you can get the JavaScript console. And this is sort of the interpreter here. So I can say in the bottom right here, I can just say 1 + 1, and up comes the answer 2. Right? It's a full JavaScript coding interpreter down here. I can say, you know, let my variable, say let foo equal 1, and I can say foo, and have foo return to the screen as 1. I can say, you know, foo plus 1 is 2. Right, so it's a full coding JavaScript interpreter here, and all that really the scripting is doing is maybe loading a little bit more environment context about Foundry, and then letting you insert commands down here. So if I actually go and set console.log hello world semicolon and execute that macro, it doesn't take it to the chat, it actually puts a console log here. That's how you would debug. You can console.log is being logged to by Foundry itself as it goes through some of its startup procedure over here. Let me see if I can make the font bigger on the actual console here, because man, that'd be cool. Yeah, here we go. So now I've got so it's a little bit easier for people to read. So I do console.log hello world execute, and I can run this down here. And if I have the same thing printing multiple times, it's purposely just saying there's 17 of those so that it doesn't spam the page. All right, great. So you know, I can go and say let, and have a variable name foo equal hello world, in quotes, it's a string, and I can say, oh, first I want to console.log foo, and then I also want to chat message.create, and then an object content foo, the string. It's already defined there. Right, close, close, close. Right, I can do that. It's going to go both places. One, it created a new chat line, hello world. I can say hello world 2, and then chat message created here, hello world 2. So that's how I'm actually coding in JavaScript when I'm here. Another tip I like giving people is that sometimes when you're coding here, maybe it's better to work in a different text editor, something that's doing a little bit more syntax highlighting for you. You don't necessarily have to work here. Let me show you another tool that you might like. So what you're seeing here is a program called Visual Studio Code. So this is an open source project, completely free, works on every platform, and it's one of the leading free and easy to use coding tools. So some people will use something like you know, text editor. I use this because it has nice little tools for doing a lot of quick stuff, you know, all over coding. So if I make a file and I name it, you know, .js, that makes it JavaScript and tells Visual Studio Code that it needs to highlight stuff like JavaScript. So I do that same console.log. See, normal JavaScript is even auto-completing here for me. Console.log hello world. There's probably some way to load up all the syntax for Foundry, but I'm not going to get that fancy. So I can do that, copy, and then paste it over in Foundry itself. And as you're working, you might want to just work in a text editor here and copy and paste, so you get the benefit of the syntax highlighting. You know, you can know really quickly what's commented out and what's not commented out. JavaScript is a big world. We're not going to get into all the details there. I'm not an expert by any means. It's been a long time since I've coded JavaScript professionally. It could be said by all the folks that work for me that maybe Dave shouldn't be the one writing code that runs in production, but for D&D, I think I can be trusted to make something that doesn't break things too much. So here we go. All right, so now you know how to take a script and put it into a macro and then click it as a button. Basic stuff. You're gonna want more examples. Unfortunately, the documentation for Foundry is still sort of a work in progress when it comes to learning this stuff in the first place. So while there's certainly some reference in there for the various objects and the functions you can call on them when you're getting advanced, when you're first getting started, there's not a lot to go on in terms of learning the easy to do stuff that you're going to have to learn to do as a GM. So instead of going to the Foundry website, we're going to go to a GitHub repo. So that's a place that people put codes, and a repo is a repository where it's like a big folder of code from a community person named Vance Cole, who's got a set of macros in here that you're going to find incredibly useful when you're first getting started. So I'm going to go and actually click on this and browse it with you. So Vance Cole's got a whole bunch of different macros, and he's got them organized. But I learned how to use the Foundry, some of the APIs here, just by looking at these examples. So for chat messages, you can see that Vance here's got one set here with a comment, that's that double slash saying what it does, and then the code to do it. So there's our create, our hello world comment there. But then afterwards, he's got a command here on how to assign the speaker as an alias for a token named Steve. Fantastic. So it kind of takes you through each of these little things and can actually show you how to get an actor and how to set a chat message as the actor. Lots of stuff you can do here, including whispering and whatnot. So he does a good job of just sort of making a little example scripts on how to do a bunch of things that you're probably going to end up wanting to do at some point if you're writing scripts and macros. So you're going to find that sometimes examples are more useful than documentation when you're first getting started. I recommend people to start with this. We're going to spend a lot of time playing around with things like status effects and tokens, and there's some really good examples in here if you want to use it as a reference. I'll link it down in the description below. Next, it's time for our second tutorial. We're going to learn how to, with code, access the token that you've currently selected, so that our workflow for doing special stuff with macros can be clicking on a thing that you want to select, and then clicking on a macro in the macro bar and having something happen. So the very simple thing we're going to do here is we're going to click on an item, and then we're going to output its name somewhere, probably into chat or maybe over in the debug output. Here we are, and what I'm going to do is with token mold turned on and the name having an extra letter appended every time I add a monster of the same type, and the config setup, I'm going to drag in some kobolds, and they're going to have names that are getting modified by token mold, so they all have different names. Close this. Let's take a look at them. Kobold A, Kobold B, Kobold C, and Kobold D. Now I'm going to create a macro. I'm going to edit the one I've already got. It's going to loop through these kobolds, and it's going to select them appropriately. Click on somebody, and then you go canvas. That's sort of the word for like the whole page that you're on. Tokens dot controlled. You can see it's even auto-completing it for me there. And if I click on that and just hit enter, what you see is returned to the screen here is an array. So square brackets means it's an array. It's of length 1. But if I had multiple things selected, so if I got this, click, 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 and clicked a whole bunch, hit the up arrow here to rerun the same command. Now I've got 4 things selected. I got 4 tokens. So if you want to make sure that you're only getting 1, you just do square bracket 0 and close that there, and that's going to get you the first one in the array. Arrays are 0 iterated in JavaScript. So I click that and I return, and I get the first token from that array, and inside there I get all this information about a kobold, lots and lots and lots of stuff, but I just want the name. So if I want to go playing around in that thing, all I have to do is hit the up arrow in this little bar here, and then go dot, maybe N-A-M-E. Is there a name? There is a name. Let's print that out. What is it? Kobold D. Is that the one I've got selected? Let's click on the first one. Let's run that command again. Kobold A is right there. Awesome. So all I got to do to go make a macro out of this is go into my macro and say, print name to debug. And I can say let name be this thing, and say console.log name semicolon, and then let's have one selected and set execute macro. And there it goes, it got printed out. So click on the second one, it got printed out. The third, it got printed out, and we're good to go. So this is how I can select a token. Now what happens if I want to select multiple of these? So now if I want to handle more of the tokens, instead of just looking at one of these at a time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a for loop. So I can say for, and then each of the things that are in these parentheses. So I'm going to go for, and this is like an iterator. This is some JavaScript magic. You don't have to worry about how this works. So I can go for all of the tokens in this group, console.log, for each one of those, token.name. It's going to loop through them and then print out the token name to the console log. So I'm going to go select a bunch of stuff, console, and the nice thing, if I have nothing selected, nothing happens because the for loop isn't iterating over anything. So it doesn't even have to get guarded. That's really nice. I'm just printing out the names. If I go up to some of my characters over here, do it, you can see that their names come out as well. Great. And it's the token name, not the actor name. All right. So that's how I go and loop through the tokens that I have selected so I can go do something to them. All right, we're getting pretty far now. Tutorial number 3, we're going to learn how to toggle a condition. And one of the things you have to know when doing this is that the command for toggling an effect, which I found inside that example repo, is token.toggleEffect, and then you have to give it the path inside your data directory to go get to the icon that you're looking for. So in my data directory, I've got a folder called Foundry that I sync in Dropbox. And then I've got a folder called icons, and then my actual PNG file that is the icon for Fairy Fire is just their Fairy Fire. I'm going to loop through all the selected tokens, and I'm going to toggle Fairy Fire. So let me go. I'm going to print that out. So the name of the location of the icon is right there. And then bump the font just a little bit, and then here's my kobolds, which I guess I'll put at the top of the screen so you have an easier time of seeing it. And I'm going to execute this macro with one of the kobolds selected, and there it is. It has Fairy Fire applied to it. Awesome. And then if I click the remaining 3 and hit execute macro, it applies it to all 3. So I can quickly go and make a icon for this one. Let's go to the user data. Let's go up to Foundry, icons, where Fairy Fire, select. So now it looks all pretty, and I can call it Fairy Fire. Save the macro, and it's down here in the macro bar. Now all I got to do is just boom, apply and unapply when they get selected by Fairy Fire. We have learned how to apply the status effects using that effects API inside of JavaScript using buttons. So now I don't have to right click and go find one for a specific spell. I could, but I have a real quick way of applying that to a large group that I like. Now it's time to talk about Combat Utility Belt, which is a power advanced macro that I think you're gonna like. Let's go take a look at it. So inside the settings here, you're gonna see a lot of complex switches and things to hit. This is has actually more settings than just what you're seeing here on the left. Let me explain. So when you get into the configuration for the Combat Utility Belt, it's going to list out a bunch of things that sort of enable major sections of Combat Utility Belt, which from here on out we'll just call it CUB, C-U-B, CUB. And the main thing that it's using to actually configure the different parts of CUB is something that it jokingly calls the CUBputer. And you can see that in the settings area of Foundry, it has a whole Combat Utility Belt section with 3 things in it: CUBputer, Condition Lab, and Triggler. We're going to go through various areas that I use and how I have them set up. So first off, in CUBputer, I think you're going to like, if you're playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, I think you're going to like something called the Concentrator. What this does is that when your character casts a spell that requires concentration, it's automatically going to apply the concentration status effect icon to your character. So you don't have to remember who, even out of the monsters sometimes, who is concentrating and who's not concentrating. Even cooler than that, when your character takes damage, it's going to prompt you and remember, hey, maybe you should be making a concentration check to see if you keep that. I think you have to go and remove it yourself. You have to, if you decide that you're not concentrating more, you have to take it off. But every time your initiative comes up, it's going to remind you, that you're still concentrating. And you have a setting down here to say if you are going to cast another spell that requires concentration, it tells you, hey, you already had something. Maybe you should turn off that other spell or something. So there's a lot of real good power in there. All right, let's try it. Select all 3 of these, right click, hit the combat tracker, and here we are. 3 things, the combat tracker. Let's roll initiative for everybody, and let's bring it open the chat. So we got a clean. So I got a clean chat, clean combat tracker, and lo and behold, the first level cleric goes first, and the cleric is going to decide to cast Bless on himself. So here in the computer, once I apply that status effect, it's going to do the concentrator thing. So I click on artists, this character, up comes his spells, and I'm going to have him cast Bless. Now, this is somebody else's character, so I'm not going to consume the spell slot, but I am going to cast the spell, and that knows, because I imported the spell over with VTTA, it knows that it's a concentration spell. So I cast Bless, and up comes a description of the spell, but also comes active conditions, concentrating here as this character. You can see it added this icon that he's concentrating, and up here in the chat, he's doing that. So maybe that's the end of his spell, maybe cast Bless on some people on the other side of the boat or something. Don't worry about that. Forgot to begin combat. I'm gonna go and pass to the next kobold. Well, this kobold runs up and he decides he's not attacking quite yet. And this kobold runs up, he decides he's not attacking right now. Maybe they're gonna emote a little bit. He's gonna say, shrug. And let's grab this one here. And this one's gonna, emote, and he's really gonna shrug, right? So he shrugs, everybody's shrugging. And then it's back up to Artist's turn. And because the concentrator and all the enhanced conditions and stuff of computer are turned on, it's reminded me here in the chat, hey, this token has concentrating turned on. I think it's because I was the player and I did it. Otherwise, I think it would come up with the actual character's name. It's just running as me. It's reminding me that concentrate is turned on. If I wanted to actively drop concentration anytime I could, it gave me this little close button here. So I can actually remove the condition if I can just find the right one for that character. Super convenient. I don't necessarily even have to right click into here and go find the active condition and click it. I could if I wanted to, but there it is and it's active. All right, so now let's say he just hangs out a bit. The kobold runs up and the kobold's gonna attack. So I'm gonna go and say inventory, attack. And let's say he did 4 damage. How many hit points does this guy have? Doesn't have a lot of. This guy's 10 hit points. Let's do 8 damage. Let's see what happens. Concentration isn't such a big deal for first level characters because they are fragile. So I do that, and it's gonna do something else I'm gonna show in a bit later where he turns bloodied automatically. But Cub Concentrator's telling me, hey, took damage and their concentration is being tested, DC 10. So I got a little thing here saying it's time for a concentration check. I think there's ways that you should actually even have the button on there, but I can go into here and say, oh, concentration check. What is that? That's a check, Constitution, rolls it, gets a 19, no problem. But if you failed it, I'd have an easy button here to click and remove the concentration. Next one, enhanced conditions, and you saw a little bit of this going on. When you enable enhanced conditions, it loads in a whole new sheet of conditions that have a little bit more to do with D&D 5th edition, and it'll output to chat. That's the thing that you were seeing. And it'll output during combat, and it'll remove the default status effects from the token HUD. Cool. So it removes all the buttons for the existing ones from the token HUD. So you're already seeing some of that going. Next, we already tried that. Next, let's get into the condition lab. This is where you can customize in the combat utility belt all the various conditions that you've got. And I wanted to get into Fairy Fire. And what I can do is that when the character's got Fairy Fire applied to them, that's the one we made the macro for, I can have it not only print out the clear button for Fairy Fire, I can also have it go and put a link to the actual spell description for Fairy Fire in there if I forgot what it does. Great. Let's go try that. So here I'm going to let's go and end the combat. Yes, great. And I've got this kobold here, and I got my Fairy Fire condition. But in the settings, I can go to the condition lab, and I can open this up, and you're gonna cheat. You're gonna see a bunch of the work I did already. We're gonna go into this Fairy Fire area right here, and you can see that I have it set up with item, compendium, and then the Fairy Fire spells in my D&D Beyond spells because I imported it in with VTTA, and I can get into Fairy Fire here. So that's basically the item, compendium entry for the spell. All right, Fairy Fire icon, all good. It all lines up. So when I go and apply the macro onto the kobold for Fairy Fire, up comes this condition. And you notice when I put my mouse over the condition here, Fairy Fire is actually highlighted. You can't see my mouse, sorry, because of the way I'm sharing my screen. But when I click the Fairy Fire down here in the corner, up comes Fairy Fire, which is pretty cool. All right, so that is how that works. Going into some more stuff, let's get into Trigler. So in Trigler, this is an area where you can set conditions such that it's going to check every time something changes about a token. It's going to go and look to see if this condition is met. And I can take this condition and I can use it in the condition lab, and I can have it apply and remove different conditions. So what, you would fill this out. So say if you were looking for, hey, when this kobold drops to 0 hit points, I want it to get the unconscious condition. So the way you do that is you go and you create a new Trigler, and you say attributes hit point value equals 0. Great, let's try that. So I go into the settings and I go into Trigler, and I would go and say attributes hit points value equals 0. And that's going to, if I hit save, that's going to create this trigger event that's going to fire every time that condition is true. And I can use this event in the condition lab. It is how to check for less than 50%. So if you say attributes hit point value is less than 50%, and then you have to, over here, you have to say less than or equal to 50%. You have to actually do the percent sign. If you do 0.5, it won't work. And then property 2, you say the max, and it's referring to the max of whatever the category and attribute was. So if the value is less than 50% of the max before the lost hit points, then this person would be bloodied. That's not really a 5th edition thing, that's a 4th edition thing, but I think you might find it useful so the players can have a better idea of which monster's been hit or not. So let's see it. So if I go into the Trigler, you can see all these, equals 0, greater than 0, less than or equal to 0, greater than or equal to 50%. When I click on them, I can go and save them and edit them, but I'm canceling here. And then where you apply these, if I go into the condition lab and I scroll down and I show you my bloodied and unconscious, yeah, those are the things, and for them maybe I've got some references into what they are. There's no journal reference for bloodied because it's not actually in 5th edition. It's just a very common house rule that people keep around. And then over here on the right, instead of no apply trigger set and remove trigger set, over here I've got the attribute hit point. I've got the triggers so that bloodied gets applied when their hit points is less than 50% of the max. And then it gets removed if ever they get healed so that they're above 50% of the hit point max. Unconscious gets applied when their hit points equal 0, and it gets unapplied later when their hit point value is greater than 0. So I can see that in effect by, hey, let's get rid of Fairy Fire here. But if I make a couple of kobolds, let me clear the chat. And this kobold, I've actually got the config turned on so that up here he's got his armor class, and down below he's got his hit points. Kobolds only have 5 hit points. It's an odd number of hit points. So let's say I go and subtract 1 damage from the hit point, he takes some damage. Let's subtract another hit point, still above 50% because he's got 3 right now, 2.5 is half. And to subtract another hit point, now he's bloodied, active conditions bloodied turns on, really useful. And let's do another one, -1. Hey, you know what, let's heal this guy up a little bit. So let's do +3, and now the bloodied condition went away. All right, so let's subtract those 3 again, take it into 1 hit point, he's bloodied, and then let's subtract 2. It should flatten out to 0 because it won't go below the min, but now he's bloodied and unconscious, and I could probably, click on this one and rotate it, make it prone as well, whatever you do to mark something as prone. And here he is, we got a dead kobold. And if he was in the initiative, I could remove some of these and mark him as dead and hide him from the initiative, and it just wouldn't come up anymore. So that all works exactly the way that it should. If it's a PC and you heal them back from consciousness, well then all you gotta do is click them and say, +100, but of course you can't get above your max hit points, so he's back to 5, and now bloodied and unconscious is back. So I just removed a lot of steps of applying and removing conditions that you might have been using manually otherwise using Trigler and the condition lab. So once again, here's the screenshot. This is how I've got Bloodied and Unconscious set up. This isn't really documented anywhere. I think this used to be kind of the automatic value in a lot of the tools, but now they've left it to the sort of raw ways this happens. I think this is very useful for Foundry 6.x. My understanding is a lot is going to change about rolling in conditions maybe in Foundry 7 eventually. So some of the notes I'm reading from the developer say that not all this stuff for triggers, etc., is automatically going to carry over. But I think I'm probably going to be running the first couple chapters of my game in Foundry 6. something. So this is a good reference for you to have available to understand how to do this. It took me a little while to get working. You got to hit that overlay checkbox to make sure that it shows up big instead of as a little icon. But this can be really useful for you if you're trying to get Bloodied and Unconscious to work appropriately. Next one, let's get into another big module, which is Token Magic FX. So this is going to apply a lot of special effects onto your tokens, which you can set with macros now that we're not scared of macros. We know how to make buttons for things. So let's try it. So not a whole lot of a plan here. I'm going to delete these kobolds that I had up, and I'm going to go and I'm going to grab another monster. Let's grab a big isometric monster so that the special effects show up. So I'm going to grab a big Tyrannosaurus Rex, and you know what? Why be mean? Why leave the kobolds out of it? Let's go into the humanoids and let's grab a kobold as well. So here I've got a kobold on deck and I got a Tyrannosaurus on deck. That kind of stuff happens in movies, right? I think that's in Jurassic Park. Dinosaur on a boat, totally happens. So next, let's get into when I have token magic installed, how you learn how to use it when you first get started. So what you do is when you have it turned on, Token Magic FX, if I go into my compendiums, it automatically loads a compendium here called Token Magic Portfolio. So I'm going to open that Token Magic Portfolio and I'm going to open it. And you can see all these different preloaded ones that it has loaded as examples, which is great. And so let's say, let's do glow. So I'm going to take glow here and I'm going to drag it down to my macro bar. I'm going to right click it, edit, and open it up. And there it is. There's the JavaScript, pretty or ugly. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy it. We're going to move it over to our coding window, and we're going to learn we're just going to dissect it for a little bit before we apply it. The first thing it does is establish some params. So I can actually open and close these curly brackets in Visual Studio Code, which is really useful for kind of, hey, how do I skip to the end of this? So it's going to create params, which is effectively just the configuration array. It's the JavaScript object. It's the way you specify a bunch of configuration in JavaScript. And if I close that, it's taking these params and it goes to Token Magic, add update filters on selected params. So it's doing all the selection and update looping logic for me. So whatever I put in this params variable that I'm assigning, it's going to go and apply to the tokens, because the person who wrote this gave us a really nice utility function for looping in a performant way across all of the things. So if I open this up, let's take a look at it. So it's got a bunch of gobbledygook in here, which you don't have to understand right away, but it says it's going to apply an array of filters. There's only one in here, but you can actually do multiple. And there's examples on here on how you overlap multiple filters at the same time. But it's going to do a glow. It's giving it the name Super Spooky Glow. And then it's going to do an outer strength, a color, some other stuff in here. And then it has an animation effect in it, which it says it's a color animation, and it's going to loop for 3,000 milliseconds, so that's 3 seconds. It's going to do something called color oscillation. So it's going to take the color property in here, it's going to loop between this value and that value infinitely on a 3-second cycle. Cool. Let's look at it. Let's see what it looks like. All right, we're back. We're going to look at this glow command, which I dragged from the compendium here. So if I select the kobold, and then I hit the glow command, on it turns and it cycles from that blue color to a slightly different blue color. And that you can go and learn how HTML color, it's that hexadecimal color in there, works. And then this just sticks on the kobold until you're done with it, right? Until you delete it. So he's got the spell on. So I'm gonna have to learn how to remove this. We're gonna make a macro for that. And then I can apply it to a big one. And since it's just a glow, it's just sort of like an outer outline glow. They've done all the work of making that work. on a couple of different types of filters. So it would be really easy for me to take this glow effect and modify it to a different color. Maybe we can have a different glow effect for different spells that my characters use a lot. But then I can look at old stuff in here and figure out maybe there's something else I want. Shockwave. I don't know what Shockwave does. Let's find out. Actually, I got a macro here for clearing. So let's look at what the Shockwave looks like. You apply it. Whoa, okay. That's a thing. I don't know if I'd ever use that, but I'm probably going to spend some time looking through all the fun stuff in here. But the one you're definitely going to want to see is the one that deletes the filters on selected. So I grab that and click on this kobold, poor kobold with a spell on it. Click delete filters on selected, and it's going to do that. So one thing that I did to make my life easier is I put little picture references down here on all the different things. So I've got a macro for removing filters. I've got a macro for removing conditions. I've got a macro for turning left and right. I got that off of the community macro. So I've got a little macro here for turning left and right. If I wanted to emote something, I think it even works on the Tyrannosaurus. Awesome. So the Tyrannosaurus maybe could face his enemy there. And I'm able to apply these. So you're going to go through these. You're going to learn about the different settings to apply some pretty cool token effects. And I mean, there's some fancy stuff in here. So maybe this kobold's a spellcaster and he's got shield or mage armor. You can actually turn on this animated, spinning globe. There's a lot of fun stuff in here. It's a pretty cool thing. Or maybe, I want to set the Tyrannosaurus on fire for a little while. Cool. So now I want to do sort of the most advanced tutorial that I'm going to do here, where we're going to combine everything that we've learned. I'm going to make a macro that has a button on it. So when I select a token and I hit that button, it's going to use the combat utility belt conditions to tell me this is the bless spell. It's going to tell me that the bless spell has been turned on. It's going to give me a thing I can click on to remind me what bless does. And then it's also going to apply a token magic, yellow glow. So I'm just going to take that one that I had before and change it to yellow and put that little icon on, and I can clear it when I'm done. Or I'm going to actually make this button toggleable so that I can just hit it again when I want to remove bless, in case maybe there's multiple conditions on there. So I'm not accidentally removing the bloodied condition when I don't want to do that. So here we go. All right, so here I've got where I'm working. I've got my bless function, which is going to be the main thing that I call. And then inside of it, this bless function is just basically just a reference to go call an async function so that once I kick it off, it'll just happen in the background, maybe while other things are happening. That way I can move quickly. So the next thing we're going to see is how I make this a toggle function. So I'm going to have the params for the bless, and I'm going to have the location of the bless, icon, which I learned how to do earlier. And then I'm going to loop through all the selected tokens. And for every one of those tokens, what I'm going to do is I'm going to token.toggle effect icon. So it's going to just turn that on and off. And then I'm going to write a little bit of code to check if that filter is already applied and I went and got the filter ID from the params, then delete the filter. Otherwise, token hasn't been applied, you need to apply it. So that's sort of like an if-else statement there if you've ever done any basic coding. For if yes, if it's one thing, then toggle it. Otherwise, do the other thing, toggle the other thing. Because there's no function for, doing this already in the token effect stuff. So here I'm going to look at the params and see what I've changed. It's just the glow function, but I named it bless. I gave it a special name because that's what it's keying off of to see if bless is already in there. And then here, color oscillation, I picked between two yellow colors. I went into Photoshop or photo editing program. I picked two slightly different yellows. So it cycles between yellow a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna copy all of this. You can see I've already got it down here, but I'm going to, let's make a new one. Let's call it new bless to make it a script. And then I'm gonna cut and paste this whole thing. I'm going to go and pick an icon for it. So I'm going to go to my user data. I'm going to go to my Foundry icons, and this is where I put a bless icon that I made, about 100 pixels by 100 pixels, something small and something readable. So there's my bless. I'm going to save it, and now let me go and clear all the filters and things from these guys. So I select both of these, and I hit the bless, and up it comes. And in the chat, here's the bless, because up in the condition lab, when I go to bless, anything with that same icon basically is going to have this configuration. It's got the item D&D spells bless, right? So now if I'm in the chat, I'm like, oh, what's this thing that's on it? What's the Halo thing? I can't remember. I look in here and I can see it's bless. I open it up, and now I've got the bless spell, which got an icon on it from VTTA. Don't worry about that. But here it's reminding me that I got to roll an extra D4. So it'd probably be good for me to have a D4 hanging out somewhere, but that's real quick. You just go roll D4, right? And there's my D4 roll for having something extra apply. If I know I have bless around, I'm probably gonna have a D4 button right next to it because I don't like typing while I'm in the middle of the game. If I can handle it, if I got a cleric that's gonna be using bless almost every encounter, I better have it ready. So that was a lot. So we learned how to do macros, how to make macro buttons, how to output stuff to the console log as I'm coding. Maybe I want to do that as I'm fixing stuff. I just want to see what's in a variable. I can print it to the console log and I can actually open it up and check out what's in it. And then I learned how to use those macro buttons to apply conditions and have those conditions kick out and have names and kick out extra stuff in the condition lab, and even to have some of those conditions automatically applied with Triggler. And then we learned how to do token magic to have the conditions have special effects on the characters, so that I can do neat things like, maybe have a whole bunch of Tyrannosaurus and stuff where I can hit bless and apply it and unapply the bless condition on and off, if I've got something that's maybe affecting lots of people. So for frightened, if you got a cleric with turn undead and you're kind of trying to track which ones have been afraid, which ones haven't been afraid, which ones lose the turn undead because they took some damage, super useful to do. And then of course, as always, if I got a whole bunch of kobolds, right, being able to click all of them and casting a fairy fire spell on all of them, super useful. Maybe I do that and then roll their saves and just remove fairy fire from the ones that don't have it. Awesome. So back over to here. Next videos, I'm brainstorming right now. I was thinking about doing more module reviews. Those usually people like those. I've joined a bunch of Patreons for different isometric art, and I wanted to show people what's in those, maybe without giving away the art, but kind of giving my thoughts on how useful they are in game once I've used them in game when my game runs. I wanted to maybe go through some of the session prep that I did for chapter 1 of my game, though that one I'm going to have to time delay a lot so that there's no spoilers in it for my players, because they have access to YouTube. I wanted to go into, now that it's about 6 months since I did my last big isometric map conversions, what tricks and tips I have to maybe speed up some of that for those that are doing isometric map conversion. And I want to show you a little trick that I've learned for using Blender, which is a 3D art program that's free, for doing some rapid creation of extra isometric art that maybe I have a 3D STL file for. Neat trick that I learned. And maybe showing people how I crank out isometric tokens really fast, because you're gonna see when you see my chapter 1, I got a lot of custom artwork in there, and it did not take me a long time to make it. So there's a bunch of ideas. Before I do that, I want to show one final token magic FX. So I go back over here. One thing that I noticed while I'm playing the game, say I've got a bunch of kobolds and they're swarming all over the deck. Look how fast that is, man. Oh, I just turned on walls. Look how fast that is. I moving all of these kobolds, that let's just say that there's other tools that are not that easy. So one thing I've noticed is that if I move the T-Rex over here, suddenly I can't get to all the kobolds that are behind it. So I had to go and create a solution for this. So one thing you'll note is I've got an extra macro down here called show behind. All it does is make that Tyrannosaurus transparent so I can see what's behind it, and then click on that and move it around. And then that token magic FX has a special setting on it, which you can find an example of in that thing, that makes it oscillate. So you can still see that there's a Tyrannosaurus there, but it's only gonna oscillate so many times before it assumes whatever you turn to transparent for isn't needed anymore, and then it pops back because it's still there. And I just click on it and it's in the foreground again. So I can go and have big characters stomping around, but I'm not creating tactical problems for my players. If they say, hey, can I see behind that Tyrannosaurus Rex? I want to make sure I don't step on a pit trap or something. I just want to see what's behind it. All right, well, hopefully some neat stuff there. If you're the one that made some of these awesome macros, examples, and modules, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I think they're super cool, and I think I'm gonna have a lot of fun playing with them, in D&D. All right, thank you, everybody. If you like that, or you are interested in any of those videos that I'm thinking about making, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and let me know what else you'd like in terms of learning how to do it. I will link to the coding macros and various things below. Thanks.